Hi, guys. I hope you're doing okay in whatever state you're listening from. And I hope that you're having better weather than I am. It looks like it's going to start pouring any second now. All right, saddle up and get comfortable. I've got 7 weird, creepy, and unexplained experiences. These are some real head scratchers. My uncle told me this wild story about his uncle, my great uncle, and I swear to this day I can't explain it. Back in the 1970s, my great uncle bought some land way out in the woods. We're talking about a deep in the woods, middle of nowhere kind of place. According to him, it came with a 2-bedroom house and plenty of forest to hunt in, fish nearby, grow a garden, and chop wood for heat. To him, this sounded like a dream come true, living off the land, saving on groceries, gas, and utilities. The only modern convenience the place had was running water, and he liked the idea of that, but he'd have to sell it to his wife. So, he convinced his wife, and the two of them packed up their old van, drove 700 miles across the country, ready to begin their new self sufficient life. When they got there, it was a total nightmare. There was no 2-bedroom house waiting for them. What they found instead was a 1-room shack in rough shape. It didn't even have any windows, and just a sad little sink tucked into the back corner, and not much else. They were devastated. They had the deed, and they were the owners, but it definitely wasn't what they'd been sold. Unfortunately, real estate laws back then weren't nearly as tight as they are today. There wasn't much they could do legally. They were stuck. So, my great uncle, who never really built much of anything before, suddenly had to become a carpenter overnight. So, they moved in, made do with what they had, and started working on the shack. Over the next 5 years, he taught himself how to build. Slowly but surely, that 1-room shack turned into a cozy little 650 square foot home. They now had a real bedroom, real kitchen and living room with a fireplace. It wasn't huge, but it was solid, and it was theirs. So now, here's where things start to get really weird. After a few years, they decided to visit family. So they left their little home in the woods, drove the 700 miles back to their hometown, and stayed for 2 weeks. Then they made the long trip back again. When they got back to their property, they thought they must have taken a wrong turn. There was this big 2-story house where their little home should have been. There was a long driveway, a big front porch, brand new windows. It looked like nothing they'd left behind. Confused, they actually went and checked the mailbox, and their name was still on it. They weren't in the wrong place. So they walked up and tried their key just to see, and it worked. The door opened right up. Inside the place, it was stunning. Big open rooms, beautiful furniture, and there was even a full garage. It was like something out of a Holmes catalog. Everything in that home was brand new, beautiful, and worked perfectly. And apparently, it was theirs. They were totally stunned. They had no idea what could have happened. They hadn't hired anyone, and when they asked the neighbors, no one had seen or heard anything. No one heard construction noise. They didn't see any crews. There were no trucks coming and going. According to the neighbors, it was silent. Now, I didn't believe a word of this at first. It sounded like a tall tale, honestly. But then my uncle went and got some old photos. And sure enough, there it was. That busted old shack, plain as day. And then the pictures of the brand new house taken after they'd come back from their trip. Same mailbox, same land, only a completely different house after that trip. I asked my parents and my other aunts and uncles, and they all swear that this really happened. But to this day, no one in my family knows how the house appeared. There were no permits, and nobody saw or heard anything, and there doesn't appear to be any explanation for it. How do you build a full 1,800 square foot house in the middle of the woods in 2 weeks' time without anyone hearing or seeing anything? I have no idea what happened. I've gone over it in my head 100 times or more, but I honestly think that whatever this was, it could have been a glitch, like a literal glitch in reality. Either that, or those woods out there are hiding something that none of us can explain. That house is still in my family, and I have an aunt and cousin that live there to this day. Signed, Rodney. Something very strange happened to me last year. The incident scared me because it felt like I was shown something that I shouldn't know about. I have a tiny Karen Terrier named Gigi, and last year in September, she disappeared from my yard. I couldn't figure out where she went to or how she got out because the gate was closed and there weren't any holes in the fence or at the bottom of it. I immediately went looking for her, and I searched for hours but never found her. Gigi is microchipped, so I was hoping that someone would find her and take her to get scanned. Well, the very next day, not even 24 hours after she disappeared, I got a call. Gigi was found, and the shelter found her chip. Now, here's the part that doesn't make a lick of sense. Gigi was found in Oregon. I live in New Jersey. That's just not possible. How did Gigi disappear, then get found about 18 hours later in a different state? My mom and I went to pick her up, and that drive took us nearly 45 hours. We drove about 14 hours each day, and it took us 3 days to get there. Gigi was in perfect condition with no injuries, and we don't have any idea how this could have happened. My mom and I kept asking one question. Is what happened to Gigi evidence of time travel? Signed, Amanda. In 1995, I was 17 years old, and it was just before starting my senior year of high school. At the time, I was on my way to meet my friends, Vinny and Chaz. None of us had a working car at the time. Mine was still a dream. Chaz didn't have one either, and Vinny's was broken down, so we walked everywhere at that time. To save time, I took a shortcut that we all used often. I knew this shortcut like the back of my hand. I knew it took me under an overpass and then down a wooded path, cutting nearly 20 minutes off of the walk. But that afternoon, taking that shortcut caused something to happen that changed everything about my life. As I walked under that overpass, I noticed immediately that something was really wrong. Normally, it was old and filthy, with graffiti, trash, and stained concrete. But that day, everything was bright white. Not just painted white either, but a glowing, unnaturally clean appearance. I'd never seen it look that way before. I kept walking, feeling uneasy, but also curious. Then, without warning, it felt like I stepped into something, like I crossed over an invisible line. Suddenly, I was inside what I can only describe as a bubble. And inside of this bubble were many albino people, white from head to toe. They spoke to me in a language that I never heard before. Yet, strangely, I somehow understood them. I don't know how, I just did. The funny thing is that I do remember understanding them, yet I can't recall anything that they said to me. I had no idea who those people were, and I wasn't even sure if they were human. I was terrified and confused. I could see and hear, but I couldn't move or speak. I don't know how much time went by, but I remember that I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was suddenly standing in my backyard. I don't know what happened when my eyes were closed. I don't know if I lost consciousness, or if time simply stopped for me. I hadn't been drinking or using drugs of any kind, and I had no mental health issues. Whatever it was, it certainly felt very real. I walked into the house, and my mother came running towards me, screaming and crying, hugging me tightly and saying over and over, "You're home! You're home!" Then my dad came in, followed by my brothers and sister, and all of them were crying. I had no idea why everyone was so upset, or what was going on, at least not yet. My dad told me to sit down, and then he asked me where I'd been. I asked him what he meant, thinking that I was in trouble because of how intense everyone was acting. But before I could give him an answer, he asked me what day it was. Then I realized that I didn't know. I couldn't answer him. He asked me what month it was, and when I tried to answer, I realized again that I honestly couldn't. I knew that it was a warm and sunny day, but that could have been any month from late spring to early fall. I really had no idea, and that scared me. That's when I learned the truth. My dad told me that I'd been gone for over 13 months. So I told my parents everything that I could remember. How I'd gone to meet Vinny and Chaz, about the white overpass, the bubble, and the albino people. I wound up having to repeat that story over and over again to the police, doctors, and other people. My parents and police asked me so many questions, but I didn't have the answers they were looking for. I didn't know where I was, why I was gone so long, or why I showed up wearing white clothes and shoes. I either didn't know or didn't remember. Later that same day, 5 men came to our house. One of the men was wearing a lab coat, and the others were dressed in regular clothes. I asked what was happening, and my parents told me that I needed to go with them. My parents told me to cooperate, telling me that they were doctors who just wanted to make sure I was okay. I was taken in the back of a black van, facing the rear doors, unable to tell which direction we were going. And then, after what felt like about an hour, we stopped. I was brought into a facility where several doctors examined me. They checked my weight and blood pressure, took blood and urine samples, did x-rays, and even did an MRI. I was there for 3 days. When they finally took me home, it was the same routine, riding in the back of the van with no sense of direction until the doors opened and I was back in my driveway. When I got there, cars were everywhere. My parents had thrown a welcome home party for me. Vinny and Chaz told me that when I never showed up at the overpass, they waited for a long time that day before going to my house. When I didn't come home that night, my parents went to the police. They were told to wait 24 hours. Then, when they returned, the police suggested that I had run away. Of course, that wasn't true, but my parents felt like they had no choice but to accept it. My parents were grateful that I was home, but they were also worried about how I would handle everything after being gone for more than a year. They told me not to talk about what really happened. They said it would only cause me problems, because people either wouldn't believe me, or if they did, they would badger me with endless questions. So when people asked me where I was, I just said that I didn't want to discuss it. And people did eventually stop asking me. It's been over 30 years now, and for the most part, I've gone on and lived my life. But I've never forgotten what happened. I don't think about it every day or even every week anymore, but I can't help but think about it once in a while, since I still don't have any answers. Signed, Destiny. Except for telling 2 people, I've kept this incident to myself, because I didn't want people looking at me like I was crazy or thinking that I was making it up. But here's what happened one day about 6 years ago. I live in Iowa, and when this happened, I was working an odd shift, 4 a.m. to noon. The job was a 45-minute drive from my home, so I had to leave my house at about 3 a.m. So this one morning, I just left my house, and just like always, it was just a couple of minutes past 3 a.m. It's about a 10 to 15-minute drive until I reach the bridge, and at the bridge, that's where I get onto the highway. At that time of the morning, there are so few cars that you really take notice of the ones you do see. Well, a car went by me in the passing lane, and it was like it came out of nowhere. I hadn't seen any lights approaching behind me before I saw the car, so I had no idea that there was another car that close to me until it was in the process of passing me. The next thing that I know, I'm back on the bridge in the spot before I get onto the highway. It was more than just a deja vu moment. I knew that I'd already gotten onto the highway and I'd been driving on it for several minutes. I remembered being on the bridge the first time, and I also remembered that car passing me. Yet there I was, approaching the on ramp for the highway for the second time that morning. I didn't take much time to ponder what just happened, because to the left side of the bridge, a really bright beam of light was coming down from the sky, and it seemed to be shining down on a barge that was going down the river. I'd never seen a light like this before, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Nothing was flying overhead. There was no helicopter, no plane. There was nothing at all up in the sky. There weren't any other cars around, so I pulled over and just sat there looking up at it. I sat there looking at the light for about a minute, but nothing more happened, so I never did figure out where it was coming from. I knew that I had to get to work, so I got back on the road, and 2 minutes later I was back on the highway again. Well, I couldn't have driven for more than another mile or two, but I should have been on the highway for about another 30 minutes or so. In the blink of an eye, I was in the parking lot where I worked, already parked in a spot. What made this unexplainable is that it was only 3:15 a.m. There's no way that I could get to work in 15 minutes. It would be impossible no matter how fast I was going. And the time wasn't right, because I know that it was past 3:15 when I was on the bridge looking up at the light in the sky. So I was completely dumbfounded. Trying to find a logical explanation, I wondered if maybe the clock in my car wasn't working, and maybe I really had driven the usual amount of time. But when I was walking to the building, one of the security guards saw me and said, "Hey, you're here early." I asked the guard, "What time do you have?" Well, I'll never forget what he said. He replied, "It's 3:19." I've never come up with any explanation for the way time moved that morning, or how I got to work so fast without recalling driving the whole way there. I have no idea how, but I think that the beam of light that I saw was somehow connected to my lost time experience. Signed, Lilac. In 2015, I adopted an adorable little kitten, a sweet little gray tabby. I named her Plinko, after the Price is Right game. I had Plinko for roughly 4 years when something really bizarre happened, and I can't explain it. Something that I really enjoyed doing was having my morning coffee while sitting in my garden patio. It was always the most peaceful part of my day, and Plinko loved being out in the garden too. I can remember a few times that I forgot to let her outside with me, and when that happened, she was quick to get my attention by going to the door and meowing very loudly. The two of us would spend as much time out there as we could, as long as it wasn't raining, of course. Mornings in the garden is something we did hundreds of times, and always without any trouble. I'd sip my coffee while watching Plinko lay in the sun, and that's about all she ever did. She was a rather lazy cat, and not the kind of cat that chased after birds or anything like that. So I just don't understand why or how this even happened. But one day, as I sat and sipped on my coffee like always, Plinko suddenly got up and was staring at something, but I couldn't see what she was looking at. The garden was just as quiet as could be, so I couldn't imagine what it was. But I watched in disbelief as Plinko took off and ran up a tree. I'd never once seen her climb a tree, yet she ran up that tree like she did it 1,000 times a day, and she was so fast. What I saw next terrified me. All of a sudden, I saw this dark shadow appear, and it began to grow and cover up the tree that Plinko just ran up. It was quickly making the tree impossible to see. In just a few seconds, there was only this giant black shadow. It wasn't there long. It quickly started going away, moving away from the tree. But after that shadow was gone, that tree was gone too. I didn't go over to that area immediately, but when I did, I saw that the ground looked like the tree had never been there at all. There was no hole where the tree was, and it looked like it had always been that way. And that didn't make any sense. That tree had to be at least 25 feet tall, and it had been on this property long before I moved in. But there was no denying that the tree had vanished, leaving me in shock over what I'd just seen. I sat there for a long time, and I watched and waited, but Plinko never appeared. I watched her go up that tree with my own eyes, but she never came back down, and I think she was made to vanish, just like the tree. She was gone. I don't know where to, but I knew she was gone. I was hoping that somehow she would come back, but I never saw Plinko again. Years later, I still don't know what I witnessed, or where Plinko went. What made her react that unusual way that morning? What did she see? I like to hope that maybe it was a portal of some kind, and Plinko is laying in the sun in another dimension. The worst thing about having an experience like this is that there's really nobody you can call. If I had called the police, they would have had me locked up for at least a few days. Eventually, I told a good friend that I thought might believe me because of the paranormal experiences that he had years ago. As it turned out, he did believe me, and that was some comfort. But he didn't have any more answers than I did. My friends kept telling me that I should get another cat or kitten, but I just couldn't bring myself to adopt another cat. However, a few months ago, I adopted a small senior dog, and his name is Barker. I didn't name him, but I liked the nod to The Price is Right. It made me think of Plinko. Signed, Liz. My name is Carol, and something happened last year that made me think that I may have been wrong about these things all along. I used to believe that there had to be a rational explanation for what people call glitches. Then it happened to me, and I still don't have an explanation for it. In March of last year, I purchased a pair of sandals from Amazon. I received them and put them in the closet, and that's where they stayed in the box in my closet until the end of May. I wore them to a cookout at my friend's house, and I distinctly remember being a little bit upset that I'd just worn them for the first time and already got a stain on the fabric band. When my husband and I got home from the cookout, I took the sandals off and I left them by the door. The next night, as I went by the door, I realized that my sandals weren't there where I left them. Of course, I asked my husband, but he said that he hadn't moved them and he hadn't seen them either. I was baffled as to where they could have gone, but then I didn't think about it again for a few days. About a week later, I was in my closet, and that's when I went to remove the empty shoebox that my new Skechers sandals had come in. I was surprised when I pulled the box from the shelf that it didn't feel empty. It had weight to it. I flipped the lid open, and those blue butterfly sandals were inside the box, and they still had the hang tags on them. And I was really shocked to see that there was no mustard stain on the fabric band. How is this even possible, I wondered. That didn't make any sense at all. The sandals were in the box as if I'd never worn them, but I did wear them. I wore them and got a stain on them just last weekend. My husband and my friend both witnessed it. Was this a glitch in reality? I have no explanation for this. And while I know it's a very small thing, I now understand why these glitches get people so freaked out. My name is Kaya. In 2016, my boyfriend Zach and I went camping at Zion National Park. We spent a few days there, hiking, exploring, and just enjoying being together. It really was an amazing trip. On our fourth and final day, we were walking, talking, and laughing when we noticed other people nearby. Well, wanting some privacy, we decided to walk off in a different direction. Well, that turned out to be a big mistake. We walked for a while and eventually sat down to rest. And then I told Zach that I had to use the bathroom. So I got up and I walked maybe 10 feet. Right after I was done, I turned around, and that's when I noticed that the scenery had changed, and Zach wasn't sitting where I left him. I looked in every direction, but I didn't see Zach, and suddenly my heart started racing, and I began yelling his name. I heard him yell back, and I shouted that I couldn't see him and asked him where he was. And then I saw him, and he started walking towards me, but then suddenly stopped. "I can't get to you," he shouted. I was confused. What did he mean he couldn't get to me? I might have thought he was joking, but he looked confused too. I kept moving towards him, but that's when I slammed into something invisible. I lifted my hands and I felt what seemed like a solid wall, even though there was nothing there. Zach reached out too, and something there was blocking us from touching. At that point, we were only inches apart, yet separated by something we couldn't see. And just then, a man walked up behind me, and he scared me half to death. I started begging this man for help and tried to explain to him what was happening, but he thought that Zach and I were playing around. "Reach your hand out," I told him. Well, he did, and he also felt the invisible barrier. I was really upset and crying at that point. Zach told me to walk back to our campsite and told me that he would meet me there. I asked the man to walk with me, and thankfully he agreed. When we reached the campsite, Zach wasn't there, and it was starting to get dark. I was terrified and kept asking where Zach could be. But the man didn't have any answers, and I knew that. Eventually, I laid down exhausted and sobbing, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was startled because I felt someone's arms around me. Well, I jumped up and screamed. It was a man that I'd never seen before. "Gaia, why are you screaming?" the man asked. "Who are you?" I demanded. The man responded, but sounded just as confused as I was. He said, "I'm Damien, your husband?" I told the man that I wasn't married, that I've never been married. But he lifted up his hand and then grabbed mine and lifted it too, pointing out our matching rings. I stood up way too fast and I fell on the floor, and that's when I realized I was in a bedroom, one that wasn't familiar to me. "Where am I asked. This man looked even more confused and concerned as well. He said, "Kaya, knock it off. You're going to wake up the kids." "Stop it," I told him. "I don't have kids." He was now looking extremely troubled, and he said, "Kaya, we have a daughter who's 5 and a son who's 2, and if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny at all." I told him that he was wrong and that he was the one playing a joke on me. That's when he called my parents. When I spoke to my mother, she told me gently that Damien was in fact my husband, and those were my children. I asked her where Zach was. My mom went quiet, but eventually said to me, "You haven't talked about Zach in years. What's going on?" She then told me that Zach moved to Australia, but I didn't remember any of it. My mom then came over and she kept reassuring me that this was my life, that this was real. She suggested that I see a therapist, so I did. The therapist told me that maybe what I remember about Zach and the trip we were on were actually false memories, that sometimes trauma can cause this. But I don't think that's what this is. If something traumatic happened to me, surely my parents would have known about it. Years later, I found Zach on social media. He was now happily married with 2 children of his own. We exchanged messages for a while, and he remembered our trip to Zion National Park, but he said he didn't remember anything unusual happening. None of this made any sense to me. I know that something happened to me on that camping trip. I don't know if it was a glitch, a time slip, or something else entirely, but I know that my life changed in an instant. So here I am, married to a man that I don't really recognize as someone I have history with. And I have children that I do love and care for, but I struggle to emotionally connect with them. My husband is at his breaking point, and he's talking about divorce. Maybe that's for the best. I feel like I'm living someone else's life, and I hate it. I wish I could write that my weird experience had a happily ever after ending to it, but that just isn't the case. I feel like whatever path I was on before Zion National Park was the path that I was supposed to be on. But when I lost all that time, I wound up in an unfamiliar life that I'm living right now. I'm pretty sure that people are going to think that this is all due to some psychological condition. That would be the logical answer. I wish that was the reason, because at least there are treatments for that. But I don't think that's the reason. I think what happened to me was caused by that invisible wall that Zach and I accidentally encountered. I think it affected the timeline for both me and Zach. Over the past 10 years, I've often thought about going back to Zion. I guess I just want to see if I could find that invisible wall again. I suppose I just want to see what would happen.